The first thing Ellie Landon noticed that morning wasn't the sun or the birds, but the sound of metal scraping against wood. She stepped outside barefoot onto the porch of their newly bought home. In Belridge Estates, coffee in hand, and her heart sank. A single sheet of paper flapped in the warm Texas wind, nailed directly into their cedar door, splintering the wood beneath it. She peeled it off and scanned the typewritten message. It wasn't just a fine, it was a threat. You have 24 hours to remove the unauthorized solar installation on your roof. This is your only warning. Non-compliance will result in forced action and removal. No contact number, no signature. Just the word board. Jake had told her that HOAs could get petty, but this was something else. Jake was out of state, managing a cybersecurity job in Phoenix. She'd waved him off 2 days ago, promising she'd handle everything. The last thing she expected was to be threatened for trying to save on electric bills. She texted him a photo of the letter, followed by "Call me ASAP." The call came a minute later. Jake's voice was already tight. "What the hell is that? Supposed to mean forced action? I don't know, but I'm scared, Jake." They nailed it to the door. He fell silent. "I'll check the bylaws tonight," he said. "You're not taking a single panel down." Later that evening, the situation escalated. A white truck pulled up slow, engine idling at the curb. Ellie stepped out onto the porch again, trying to act calm. Out stepped a man in full camo cargo pants, tight black shirt, and a baseball cap that said "Don't tread on me." He was built like a fence post and just as pleasant. "You Ellie Landon?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes." He gestured to the roof without looking. "You've got 1 day, then the board sends me back." She swallowed. "You're from the HOA." He smiled without humor. "Board enforcement." And then he turned, revealing a holstered handgun on his hip. "Openly worn. Legal in Texas? Sure. But meant to scare? Absolutely." He walked off with a smirk and didn't look back. Ellie slammed the door and locked every bolt. That night, she didn't sleep, and neither did Jake. Watching through their Ring camera from 1,000 miles away, at 3:40 a.m., the same truck circled the cul-de-sac. Ellie whispered through the camera, "He's back." The next morning, Jake was already in his car, tearing through the desert highway. Going 85 in a 65, he didn't care about speed limits or contracts. Something felt wrong. This wasn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This felt personal. Back in Belridge, Ellie tried calling the HOA office. The number listed on the website went straight to voicemail. She walked over to the clubhouse, but the doors were locked. Through the glass, she saw a man sitting at a desk just staring at her and not moving. Then she saw a dot above the reception desk. Mounted like a trophy was a framed photo of a firing range event labeled Board Retreat 2022. And standing dead center was the man from last night, gun raised, eyes cold. She backed away and hurried home. Jake arrived late that evening. The moment he stepped inside, he hugged Ellie tight. Then he walked straight to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He pulled up satellite images of the neighborhood. HOA board members' homes were marked in red, their own in green, and something else caught his eye. There was a camera mounted on the HOA clubhouse, aimed directly at their house, and that's when Jake realized someone had been watching long before the letter arrived. He didn't say a word. He simply opened a drawer, pulled out a hard drive, and began downloading every second of footage their Ring and Nest cams had captured since the day they moved in. Ellie, still shaken, asked softly, "What are you doing?" Jake stared at the screen and replied, "They think they started something, but they forgot to check who they were messing with." The storm hadn't arrived yet, but it was brewing, loud, hot, and about to level everything in its path. Jake Landon hadn't seen rain like this in years. The wipers thrashed back and forth against a windshield smeared with desert dust and rising fury. As thunder cracked through the clouds above I-10, Jake gritted his teeth and floored it. Doing 90 in a rented Chevy that smelled like someone else's fear, he wasn't headed home. Not exactly. He was headed toward a fight he hadn't started, but one he was sure as hell going to finish. Every few minutes, he tapped the dashboard to refresh the Ring camera feed from his phone. The last recorded motion had shown that same white truck rolling past the house again, crawling like a predator that had found a scent. Ellie hadn't called again since morning, but Jake knew her well enough to know that silence from her meant she was holding it together, just barely. When he finally turned into Belridge Estates well past midnight, he killed his headlights to blocks from the house and coasted in slow. He didn't want to alert whoever was still watching. His first move wasn't to knock on the door. It was to check the yard, every window, every fence post, every motion light. That's when he found it, buried beneath the hydrangea bush near the fence, barely sticking up above the mulch, was a second notice. Weather warped and hand-delivered. "This is your last chance. Board enforcement won't knock next time." Jake crushed the note in his fist. Inside, Ellie was waiting with a baseball bat across her lap. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she just handed him a flash drive. I downloaded all the camera footage, she said. I didn't know what I was looking for, but you will. Jake barely slept. The next morning, while Ellie made breakfast, like it was any other Tuesday, he sat at the kitchen counter with headphones on, scrubbing through hours of silent footage. Doorstep drop-offs, truck pauses. The same man rifle Roy loitering near the corner mailbox for 20 minutes, pretending to check his phone. And then something new. Jake rewound the footage and leaned closer. It was 4:03 a.m. 2 nights ago. A figure approached the side of their house dressed in black, face covered, moving with precision. Not a thief, not a teenager pulling a prank. This guy moved like someone trained. Jake watched the grainy footage as the figure reached up and adjusted something above the garage. The HOA installed STREETLIGHT. Jake paused, his breath hitched. That streetlight wasn't just a bulb, it had been replaced, swapped. The guy had installed a dome cam under it. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. At 10 a.m. Jake walked into the Belridge HOA office, not quietly. Ellie begged him not to go alone. But Jake didn't listen. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a warning. The receptionist looked up nervously as Jake entered, carrying a small black case under his arm. I need to speak to Glenn Harner. Now, he said. He's not available. Jake placed a still image of the midnight intruder on the counter. Another shot of the altered streetlight. Another of Roy Bensley circling in front of their mailbox. Then tell him this, I've archived every second of the footage. I have the HOA surveillance IPs. And if he so much as knocks on my door, this goes to the county sheriff, the local press, and the state's HOA oversight board. She stared at the photos with wide eyes. He leaned in closer, and just so we're clear, he said coldly, I'm not asking for protection. I'm giving a warning. Jake turned and walked out, but just as he stepped off the curb, a red Ford F-150 peeled around the corner and stopped hard. Behind the wheel sat Roy. And this time, he wasn't smirking. He rolled down the window, eyes locked on Jake. You sure you want to play this game, boy? Jake stepped forward, slow and fearless. I'm not playing anything, but if you bring that gun near my wife again, he said, voice steady, you better bring enough for the war that follows. Roy stared, engine rumbling. Then, without another word, he drove off. Jake didn't turn to watch him go. Instead, he pulled out his phone and sent a message. Not to the police, not to a lawyer. To Miguel Vargas, a man Jake once trusted to clear a village without being seen. Message read, need you. HOAS made this personal. Miguel Vargas arrived in a beat-up van that hadn't seen a car wash since the Obama years. But Jake didn't care about appearances, he cared about results, and Miguel delivered. They hadn't worked together since a covert mission in Djibouti where bad intel nearly cost them both their lives. But back then, Miguel had eyes sharper than any drone and fingers that could pull data from locked servers, like peeling labels off soup cans. Now, he leaned against Jake's porch rail with a toothpick dangling from his lips, arms crossed as Jake explained the situation. You're telling me a bunch of HOA cowboys are stalking your wife and planting surveillance cams? Miguel asked. Jake nodded, and they're hiding something big. You don't bring weapons into this unless you've got skeletons you're guarding. Miguel smirked. Then I say we rattle their bones. And just like that, Operation Fire Ant was born. While Ellie ran errands in town, still unaware of the plan in full, Jake and Miguel started mapping out every HOA-owned asset in the neighborhood. From light posts to clubhouse Wi-Fi, every wire, router, and mounted camera got its own spot on a giant corkboard. Miguel cracked the HOAS network in under an hour. They're using a third-party security firm, he said, tapping away. Company's real. But here's the weird part, it's owned by Glenn Harner's brother. They're billing the HOA $6,000 a month for external monitoring. Want to guess where the cams are pointed? Jake narrowed his eyes. Let me guess, members who've spoken out. Miguel turned the laptop. And you? 17 saved clips of your driveway, porch, and garage. Jake leaned in, jaw tight. They're not just watching, they're building a case, but there was more. Buried in the financial logs was another bombshell: payments listed as landscaping reimbursements, sent every month to a dummy LLC registered to our Bensley rifle. Roy himself. You want to talk about corruption? Miguel muttered. They're stealing from their own HOA members. Jake stepped back and took a deep breath. I'm going to bury them that evening. Ellie noticed the corkboard in the den. What is all this? She asked. Jake hesitated, then finally came clean. I didn't tell you everything because I didn't want to scare you more. But we're not dealing with HOA nonsense anymore. This is organized intimidation and fraud. She stared at the lines, photos, bank transfers, and maps. Instead of panicking, she did something Jake didn't expect. She marched into the kitchen, pulled out a tray, and began baking cookies. Jake asked, puzzled. Ellie gave him a sly smile. People talk when they're chewing. I'm visiting the neighbors tomorrow. The next day, Ellie went door to door with fresh baked cookies and a notepad in her pocket. At first, The neighbors were tight-lipped, scared, but then Mrs. Pendleton, at 300 from Maple Drive, opened up. "I got a letter too," she whispered. "They told me if I kept feeding the stray cats, they'd find me every day. And Roy, he comes by with his gun like he's doing laps. My husband's scared to mow the lawn." Another neighbor, Mr. Ellis, admitted his garden fence was cut. "In the night after a disagreement with the board, they think they run this place like a prison," he said. By sundown, Ellie had collected 5 personal testimonies and 3 more letters almost identical to hers. Meanwhile, Miguel tapped into the HOA clubhouse camera. What they saw stumped them. Roy, Glenn, and 2 others sat in the back room, not a board meeting, but a watch party. On screen, security cams from homes across the neighborhood, including one zoomed in on Ellie delivering cookies. "They're watching us in real time," Miguel muttered. Jake clenched his fists. "Then it's time we gave them something to watch." That night, Jake set up his own cameras, disguised, hidden, and streaming directly to an off-site server. Ellie's cookie rounds had drawn attention, and that was exactly the point. They weren't just gathering evidence anymore. They were baiting the hook, and someone was about to bite. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat at the dining room table with Miguel across from him. Their laptops lit up like searchlights in a war room. On the screen, footage of Glenn and Roy inside the HOA clubhouse, laughing, mocking, watching Ellie hand out cookies like she was a security risk. "They're calling her the spy," Miguel said flatly. One of them even joked about shutting her down before she got smart. Jake exhaled slowly. "This isn't just intimidation, it's targeted surveillance, harassment. And if I'm right," he tapped the map of neighborhood camera positions. "That one right there is illegal." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "The streetlight cam, yeah, it's county property. Glenn doesn't have jurisdiction to modify it. That's our wedge." The next morning, Jake walked into the county sheriff's office with a manila folder full of screenshots, HOA financial records, and a copy of the HOA charter he dug out of the archives. The sheriff wasn't in, but Officer Trish Monroe was. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, boots polished to a mirror. She listened as Jake explained everything, flipping through the pages with a slow nod. "Now let me get this straight," she said. "You've got camera footage showing the HOA board surveilling residents, using intimidation tactics, and possibly falsifying business expenses." Jake nodded. "And there's more. One of their cameras is mounted illegally on a county-owned light pole. That's tampering with municipal property." Trish leaned back in her chair. "You ever worked in law enforcement, military cybersecurity?" Jake replied. "But I know the difference between a nosy neighbor and a coordinated abuse of authority." She tapped her pen against the folder. "I'll elevate this to the sheriff. But I'm gonna be real with you, HOA issues don't usually get fast-tracked, even with all this." Jake stood, calm but firm. "This isn't about lawn heights. They're using guns and surveillance." The next letter could come with bullets. Officer Monroe looked him square in the eye. "Don't do anything reckless. Let me try it my way first." Jake nodded, but he didn't believe it would be enough. That afternoon, Ellie took her usual walk, only this time, she changed the route just enough to be unpredictable. It worked. As she crossed Willow and Marlin, a white truck slid behind her from the opposite side. She could feel it tailing her, slow and deliberate. She turned casually onto a gravel path behind the playground, hoping to lose it. The truck didn't follow. But when she returned home 15 minutes later, there was a package at the doorstep. A plain cardboard box with no return label. Jake met her at the door. "Don't touch it." Miguel grabbed gloves and opened it carefully with a blade. Inside, a single .308 round and a piece of paper. "Stop filming, we see everything." Jake stared at it like it was poison. "That's it," he muttered. "They just opened a door they can't close." He dialed Officer Monroe immediately. They escalated. "Come to the house, you'll want to see this." She arrived 20 minutes later, glanced at the box and paled. "This just turned into criminal territory," she said. "You're under threat now, I'll file it." Jake wasn't satisfied. "Filing's not action, I need you to take that clubhouse apart." Trish hesitated. "We don't have probable cause for a search warrant yet." Jake turned, unlocked his laptop, and played the latest drone footage Miguel captured. It showed Roy walking into the HOA clubhouse with what looked like a gun case, and walking out empty-handed 2 hours later, Glenn locking the door behind him. Trish's eyes narrowed. Now that changes things, but as she turned to leave, she slipped Jake a small folded note. He waited until she left before opening it. "They're not the only ones watching you. Be careful who you trust." He showed the note to Miguel, who frowned. "That's not a warning, it's a chess move." Later that night, Jake double-checked the security feeds. Everything was quiet to quiet. Then the system pinged motion detected at the back gate. Jake clicked over on the screen to figures crouched near the hydrangeas again. One held a crowbar, the other a gas can. Jake slammed the laptop shut and bolted for the garage. This was never about solar panels, he said aloud. This is about control, and they just tried to light the fuse. By morning, the smell of gasoline still lingered behind the fence. Jake had managed to chase off the figures before they struck a match, but the point had been made. It wasn't about scaring anymore, it was about silencing. Ellie didn't need convincing. She packed a bag and left to stay with her cousin on the west side of the county, away from Belridge and its poisoned sidewalks. Jake didn't stop her, not this time. Miguel stayed. He posted a new drone in the trees and reconfigured the motion sensors. Now, every inch of Jake's property fed straight to 3 different encrypted drives, 1 cloud backup and a private news outlet's tip line. But just as Jake was setting the bait tighter, Glenn Harner made his move. That afternoon, a process server came strutting up the front walk like he owned the place. Jake met him halfway down the driveway. "Jake Landon?" the man asked, unfolding a thick envelope. "You know who I am. You've been served." Inside the envelope was a lawsuit, civil harassment, defamation, unlawful drone surveillance, filed by Glenn Harner and co-signed by 2 board members. Jake scoffed. "They're trying to flip the script." Miguel looked over the documents and nodded. "Smart. While we're stacking proof, they're shifting blame, trying to make you the aggressor before the firestorm hits." Jake wasn't fazed. He'd seen enemy tactics like this overseas: change the narrative, control the optics, smear the opponent before the facts arrive. But then came the twist. Ellie was named in the suit, too. The HOA accused her of unauthorized civilian intelligence gathering, citing her neighborhood cookie runs as a form of intimidation and psychological warfare. Miguel read it twice. "They're trying to gaslight the whole town." Jake didn't wait. He called every neighbor Ellie had spoken to, everyone she baked for. He explained the situation. Some were scared. One said his wife told him not to get involved, but one Luther Green, an army vet with a limp and a bad attitude, invited Jake to his garage. "You want signatures?" Luther said, flipping open a clipboard. "Try 22. All of us who've had enough of Glenn's games." Jake flipped through names, some he didn't recognize. Others surprised him. "Why haven't any of you spoken out?" he asked. Luther shrugged. "They find us, harass us. Roy showed up here once talking about Second Amendment enforcement. My grandkids were in the yard. I stayed quiet until now." That night, Jake hosted a BBQ, not a party, a mission briefing with burgers. He rolled out a projector screen and showed the neighborhood every clip they'd captured. Roy patrolling with a rifle, Glenn locking the clubhouse vault, the gas can footage, the letters, the surveillance logs, the bogus company payouts. People murmured, eyes darted, but no one left. When Jake finished, he looked around the yard. "This stops when we say it stops. Glenn runs this HOA like a bunker, but if we go quiet, they win. If we stay divided, they'll keep us afraid." Then he held up the lawsuit. "They think this paper scares me, but we've got the truth, and now we've got each other." One by one, people clapped, and then someone stood. "Mrs. Pendleton from 300 from Maple Drive. I want that clubhouse searched, whatever they're hiding in there. It's not for the good of this community." Miguel leaned close. "We just turned the tide." But later that night, as Jake loaded footage into an off-site drive, a knock sounded at the back door, not the front. He drew his sidearm. Something he'd hoped never to need again. He opened the door to find Officer Trish Monroe. No cruiser in sight. She was in plain clothes, hair tied back, eyes uneasy. "I can't stay long," she whispered. "But you need to know something. Your name came up in a sealed brief to the county. Someone's trying to label you a domestic threat." Jake blinked. "What?" "Someone in the sheriff's office thinks you're building a militia." Jake stared, speechless. Trish continued, "You're being watched by more than just the HOA. Keep your cameras rolling. And whatever you're planning next, make sure you're ready." Then she turned and disappeared into the night, for the first time in days. Jake Landon didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of preparation. Trish Monroe's warning rang in his ears on repeat. "You're being watched by more than just the HOA." At 3:20 a.m., Miguel clicked a final key on his laptop and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "We're up. All the drives are backed to for remote servers. If anything happens to you or me." That footage dropped straight to 3 newsrooms and 2 watchdog agencies. Jake nodded without taking his eyes off the blueprint pinned to the wall. "We're not just dealing with HOA criminals anymore," he said. "We're playing chess with ghosts." By morning, Jake and Miguel launched Phase 2, while the HOA was still busy pushing lawsuits. Jake mailed a detailed packet to State Attorney Regina Mallory, known for hating local corruption. Included were screenshots of payments to Glenn Harner's brother's company, the illegal surveillance camera network, testimony from neighbors, and stills of the gas can incident. He didn't stop there. He also leaked edited footage to an anonymous social justice YouTube channel called The Watchman's Ledger. With 300,000 subscribers, they'd never touched HOA corruption until now. The video dropped at noon. Title: HOA Board Gone Wild, Armed Threats, Hidden Cameras and Fraud in Belridge Estates by Sunset. The video had 80,000 views. Neighbors Jake had never spoken to were suddenly emailing, texting, and forwarding their own horror stories. Then came the moment Jake had been waiting for. Two black SUVs rolled into the Belridge Estates cul-de-sac. No sirens, no fanfare. State investigators. From across the street. Roy watched from his porch with his rifle case by the door. He didn't move. But his lips were tight, eyes shifting. The officials made straight for the HOA clubhouse. Glenn was inside. He tried to slam the door shut, but they were already in. Miguel and Jake watched the whole thing from the drone feed. Think he hid anything? Miguel asked. He's too arrogant to believe this day would ever come, Jake replied. But just when it seemed the walls were falling, the house shook again. At 3:44 p.m., a plain white van barreled through the back gate of the Landons property. Tires screeching. Jake rushed out. Miguel grabbed the camera. But when the doors of the van opened, it wasn't attackers. It was neighbors. Three men Jake barely recognized, local business owners. One of them with a broken arm. We need help, the man in the sling said. We've been fighting our own HOA battle to streets over. When that video dropped, we realized we're up against the same players, same names, same fake companies. Harner's been running dummy contracts across half the county. Jake stared. You're saying this isn't just Belridge? The man nodded. It's a network, Miguel muttered. That explains the surveillance. They weren't just watching you, they were watching for threats to their empire. But while the web unraveled, Glenn Harner made one last desperate play. At 6:09 p.m., Ellie, safe at her cousin's, called Jake, panic in her voice. There are two men in dark coats outside my cousin's place. They asked the neighbors for my full name. Jake's voice dropped. Stay inside. Do not open the door. He ended the call, looked at Miguel, and said just one word: lockdown. They activated the backup plan and auto-trigger system that broadcasted the rest of their drone footage live. It showed Glenn's safe being cracked open, showed Roy loading long guns into the back of his truck. Then came the final shot, an overhead still of a hidden construction site behind Glenn's office. Fenced off and labeled community upgrades. Inside, a concrete vault. Jake zoomed in. The vault door was open. Inside were burn bins, boxes of documents, and for gun cases to empty. They were ready to burn it all, Miguel said. You exposed them just in time. Jake didn't answer. He was already dialing. The line clicked. This is Judge Penley, the voice said. I received your packet, Jake spoke calmly. We've got one shot to shut this down before someone gets hurt. Penley's voice came back cold and sharp. Then you'd better have your evidence on record, because if this goes federal, it's your word versus theirs. Jake didn't hesitate. Check your inbox, he said. The HOA clubhouse had gone dark. No lights, no cars, no Roy, no Glenn, but Jake knew better. Dark didn't mean silent. It meant someone was moving in the background that night. While Ellie stayed hidden under a new alias out of town, Jake and Miguel turned their garage into something else entirely, a war room and a trap, all in one. Inside, cables fed into laptops and battery banks. Microphones were embedded in the walls, feeding audio to real-time cloud servers, and in the ceiling rafters. Above it all, a tiny thermal camera pointed down, triggered by motion, heat, or sound. Jake's voice was steady. If they come here, we need their intentions caught on record. No more guessing. No more benefit of the doubt. Miguel nodded, pulling up the feed. It's running. Motion sensors set to stream live. If someone steps inside. Jake stepped back and stared at the room. To anyone who broke in, it would look like evidence. Central cords, drives, prints, a hard drive flickering with blue light. The bait was set, and now they waited. By 1:17 a.m., Miguel was asleep on the couch. Jake sat on the front steps, staring at the stars, and then it happened. The camera pinged. Two figures slipped across the backyard. Jake didn't move. He whispered to the Bluetooth mic in his collar. They're here. Miguel bolted upright inside. Monitors lit up. One figure was larger, likely Roy, the other slimmer, more methodical. Possibly Glenn. They paused at the garage door. Miguel zoomed in. Roy was holding a crowbar. The other was wearing gloves and carried a duffel. Jake's security lights were disabled. Cut wires earlier that day. He let it happen. Roy forced the door open, slow and silent. The moment they crossed the threshold, the thermal camera triggered. Video streamed to 3 live recipients: Judge Penley, Officer Monroe, and the state investigator assigned to Jake's file. The garage light flipped on. Roy flinched. Glenn hissed, "Move fast." Grabbed the drives. They rushed forward, and that's when Jake made his entrance. He stood at the door holding nothing but a flashlight and his phone in the other hand. "No need to steal what's already gone," he said calmly. "It's been uploaded for hours." Glenn froze. Roy reached for his waistband. "Don't," Jake warned. "You draw. This feed goes national." Miguel's voice crackled through the earpiece. "They're both being watched for angles, audios, Solid, Glenn dropped the duffel. We were just what? Jake cut him off. Checking my garage at 2 a.m. with a crowbar and burner gloves, sirens sounded in the distance. Getting closer, Glenn panicked. You've made this bigger than it needed to be. No, Jake said, stepping closer. You did. When you threatened my wife, when you tried to burn my house down, when you pulled half this neighborhood into your twisted little empire. Roy's hand hovered at his hip, but he didn't pull, not this time. Red and blue flashed at the end of the street. A cruiser slid to a stop. 2 more followed. Trish Monroe was first out, gun drawn, eyes locked on Roy, hands in the air now. Roy raised both arms, face pale and jaw tight. Glenn went to his knees before anyone told him to. Trish cuffed them herself. Guess those HOA rules didn't cover breaking and entering. As Glenn was led away, he turned to Jake. You just tore this place apart. Jake replied, no, I just tore off the mask. Before sunrise, news vans lined Belridge's front entrance. Word had spread. The footage hit national feeds. Glenn Harner's name became trending news. Roy's gun club lost its license, and the HOA charter revoked permanently. But the real twist came the next day. Miguel found something in the metadata. The HOA surveillance software, it wasn't just used here. It had IP traces connected to 4 other developments across the state. Same software, same architecture, same dummy security firm owned by Glenn's brother. This wasn't a one-off, Miguel said. This was a franchise of fear. Jake looked at the wall map again, more red pins than ever before. This isn't the end, he muttered. It's the first battle. 2 weeks after the arrests, the sun rose over Belridge Estates like nothing had ever happened. Lawns were still trimmed. Mailboxes still stood. But something fundamental had shifted. Fear had been replaced with eyes wide open. Jake stood outside the county courthouse in a crisp button-down, no tie, Ellie beside him, her hand wrapped tightly around his. She had come home, and she wasn't hiding anymore inside. The courtroom buzzed. The case had been expedited. The state of Texas versus Glenn Harner and Roy Bensley. The charges? Criminal trespass, armed intimidation, surveillance abuse, financial fraud. State Attorney Regina Mallory had made it clear this wasn't just about 2 men. This was about a broken system given a badge and no leash. The judge entered Penley, iron-backed and slow-speaking, with a courtroom presence that could level concrete. As the trial began, Glenn looked like a man unraveling his suit. Wrinkled, eyes puffy. Roy wore a smug grin until the footage rolled. Clip after clip played. Roy patrolling with open carry, unsanctioned and uninvited. Glenn watching Ellie's every move from the clubhouse cameras. Aerial drone footage of weapons being loaded and documents hidden in the fake upgrade site. And finally the garage footage, where both men broke in with tools and intent. Jake watched silently. Miguel sat to Rose's back, arms folded. Ellie had one hand on her stomach, the other gripping the armrest. She hadn't told Jake yet, but they were expecting. The defense tried hard, claimed Jake had entrapped them. Said Ellie's neighborhood walk was provocation, that Miguel's drones violated privacy. But it didn't matter. The jury deliberated only 4 hours. When they returned, no one breathed. The foreman stood, voice clear. We find Glenn Harner and Roy Bensley guilty on all counts. The courtroom burst into murmurs. Glenn's shoulders dropped like bricks. Roy didn't blink. He just stared straight at Jake with something cold behind his eyes. Not anger, not regret, but unfinished business. The judge sentenced them both to 5 years in state prison, with Roy's weapon-related charges tacking on to more. The HOA charter was fully dissolved by court order. The financial restitution? Close to $600,000 to be paid in part to residents, including the Landons. When Jake and Ellie stepped outside, reporters swarmed. One shouted, Mr. Landon, do you feel justice was served? Jake paused. Then he said quietly, this wasn't justice. This was just exposure, but I hope it wakes people up. The next few weeks were peaceful, almost too peaceful. Families that had once kept curtains closed were now talking on sidewalks. Neighbors who never spoke were sharing stories. And the houses that once hid behind fear now wore flags, wind chimes, and laughter. Ellie finally told Jake the news about the baby. He didn't cry. He just held her for 10 minutes without a word. Forehead against hers. Miguel left town shortly after. Left behind a hard drive and a note. Use this only if another mask slips. Jake locked it away. But the storm wasn't done with him yet. 3 months later, Jake got a letter, no return address. Inside was a photo, blurry, black and white. It showed a man in a prison jumpsuit, sitting alone at a table. Next to him a guard holding out a phone. The message written on the back, we don't all stay in cages forever. Jake stared at it for a long time. Then he walked out to the shed, unlocked the back drawer, and placed the letter beside Miguel's hard drive, because Glenn might have lost. Roy might have been caged, but the system that created them? Still breathing, still watching. Final call to action within the story. Would you fight for your neighborhood if the enemy wore a suit? Instead of a ski mask, Jake did and he won, but the battle wasn't against people. It was against silence. If your community's being watched, manipulated, or controlled, the real question is, what will you do about it? The end.